Have you ever wondered why a woman's silent remorse can ignite a man's darkest desires and tether his heart in unseen chains? In the space where her regret dwells, he discovers a hidden altar of longing, an altar upon which he offers his obsession, unaware that each offering only deepens his captivity. She moves through her days, carrying the weight of choices she cannot undo, a spectral beauty shaped by the echoes of love lost and opportunities surrendered. In the eyes of a man standing at the edge of her sorrow, she becomes both healer and tormentor, a paradox of compassion and cruelty, wielding feminine power distilled through the prism of her own painful self-reflection. He watches her from across crowded rooms and in the hush of late-night texts, sensing something rare and incendiary in the tremor of her voice. He catches the tilt of her chin when she speaks of mistakes, the way her gaze flickers between shame and steadfast resolve. In her confession, he tastes forbidden fruit, the bittersweet nectar of vulnerability entwined with a promise of depth. His ego quivers, torn between the impulse to rescue and the hunger to possess. Each admission of regret carves a new channel in his psyche, drawing him inward toward the dark currents of his own shadow. She does not seek his absolution. Her words are not a plea for pity. Instead, they stand as testament to her own inner alchemy, the transformation of shame into self-knowing. In admitting her faults, she conjures a somber grace, beckoning him to witness her humanity. Yet this grace is not surrender. It is sovereignty. In that sovereign sorrow, he feels both drawn and repelled, as though stepping into her storm will either shatter him or unmake the brittle walls of his own constructed identity. He becomes addicted to the tension between empathy and power, between the urge to comfort and the compulsion to claim. In the silent aftermath of her revelations, he retreats into contemplation. He reads Seneca by candlelight, tracing the Stoic injunction to perceive events without judgment, yet finds himself unable to detach. The intellect falters before the magnetic pull of her emotional terrain. Jung's anima archetype stirs within him, beckoning with its siren song, surrender to the feminine depths or risk remaining forever uninitiated. He journals feverishly, scribbling fragmented thoughts. Why does her regret burn brighter than her joy? What phantom of safety does he hope to reclaim by chasing her apology? She continues her rituals of introspection, meditations at dawn, long walks beneath canopies of cedar, the habitual rewriting of letters she never sends. In those labors, she excavates the roots of her remorse, unearthing childhood scars and ancient stories of ancestral pain. Her shadow work is a pilgrimage through the underworld of her psyche, a descent charted by her own fearless inquiry. In her solitude, she rediscovers the wild woman within, the one who resists societal scripts and dances on the rim of her own contradictions. She is both penitent and powerful, a living testament to the paradox of feminine sovereignty. He witnesses the contours of her metamorphosis and feels his own heartbeat accelerate. His obsession is no longer the simplistic desire to possess her. It is a desperate need to mirror her capacity for transformation. He realizes that to chase her without understanding his own depths is to remain shackled to the surface of his ego. And yet he cannot help himself. Each time she reveals another shard of her past, he feels the scramble of his instincts. Rescue, soothe, control, like a trio of phantom limbs eager to stitch her back into the safety of his expectations. You may see how this dynamic becomes a crucible for both. In her regret, he discovers the raw material of his own awakening, the tender wounds he has long ignored, the defenses he uses to shield himself from his own vulnerabilities. When she speaks of regret, she hands him a lantern to light his own darkness. But if he grasps it as a tool of conquest, rather than an initiation into self-awareness, he will burn his hands and stall his journey toward wholeness. So he must learn to hold her sorrow with reverence, neither rescuing nor retreating. He must cultivate the discipline of presence, as Marcus Aurelius taught, observing her pain without becoming consumed by it. He must transform his addiction to her regret into devotion to his own healing. In the silent spaces between her confessions, he must sit with his own discomfort, naming the fear that he is not enough to hold such intensity. Only then can he move from the role of pursuer to partner, one who walks beside her through shadow and light. And she, in turn, must recognize the power she wields each time she leans into her remorse. Her regret is a double-edged blade. It can sever him from her or bind him more deeply into the temple of her mystery. When she wields it consciously, she holds the key to transmuting obsession into devotion. Devotion not to her form, but to the alchemy of shared transformation. Her words become rites, her silences become sanctuaries, and in that sacred architecture, he either finds liberation or becomes lost in a labyrinth of his own unexamined desires. In this dance of sorrow and power, both stand at the threshold of initiation. The question looms, will he fan the flames of his obsession until they consume him, or will he answer the call to dive into his own darkness, guided by her sorrow as a compass? And will she, bearing the burden of her past, release the need to bind him to her pain, choosing instead to stand free in her own emerging light? He steps into the chasm of her vulnerability with tentative reverence, each heartbeat a drumbeat calling him deeper into her depths. In the hush of her reflection, he discerns the architecture of her sorrow, the pillars of shame, the archways of grief, the mosaic of memory pieced together by tears and forgiveness. She does not guide him by instruction, rather her very presence, shaped by the contours of past regret, becomes a living map of transformative potential. He traces the curves of her silence, learning that the spaces between words can speak louder than any confession. In those silent interludes, you witness the alchemy at play, the transmutation of regret from a prison into a crucible. Her remorse, once a scarlet letter stamped upon her soul, now glows like embers in a hearth, no longer a mark of shame, but a source of warmth and illumination. He watches as she embroiders her wounds with threads of self-compassion, stitching together a tapestry that celebrates imperfection. And as he bears witness, he feels the pull of his own unhealed fractures calling for similar grace. Yet the path to integration is rarely linear. On some evenings, she retreats into the solitude that once felt like exile, her apology looping endlessly in her mind like a broken hymn. He waits at the threshold, torn between the impulse to close the gap and the wisdom to respect her need for space. In that tension, he confronts his yearning for certainty, his fear that her momentary withdrawal signifies an ending rather than a necessary pause. He recalls Epictetus reminding him that true freedom lies not in controlling circumstances, but in mastering one's reactions. So he turns inward, offering himself patience instead of pressure. You might ask, how does one transform obsessive longing into patient devotion? The answer lies in the practice of shadow companionship. He learns to sit with his discomfort as she sits with hers, without judgment, without haste. When anxiety gnaws at him, he names it. Here is fear. Here is shame. Here is the phantom of my own unworthiness. By giving voice to the silent saboteurs within, he strips them of their power to compel him toward frantic pursuit. His attention shifts from chasing her shadows to tending his own inner garden, cultivating seeds of equanimity and self-trust. She senses this shift like a tremor in the earth. In her next confession, her voice carries no tremble of accusation, but a quiet curiosity. What have you discovered in your shadow's soil? In answering, he offers her a reflection of his journey, an honest recounting of nights spent wrestling with the boy who sought approval, the man who feared abandonment. His words become sacred offerings, tokens of his willingness to walk beside her through the dark woods of the psyche. In that moment, obsession frays at the edges, replaced by a tender devotion rooted in companionship. As their dances of confession and reflection unfold, they begin to craft rituals that honor their shared pilgrimage. At dusk, they light candles and share poems that speak of metamorphosis, transformations drawn from mythology and modern memoir. They trace the stories of Psyche and Eros, of Isis rising from the underworld, of wounded heroes who found redemption in the embrace of the feminine divine. In these rituals, his addiction to her regret finds new expression, not as a hunger for her apology, but as an appetite for the sacred stories that bind souls together. Their late-night dialogues evolve into a sacred geometry of questions. Where does your regret still linger, and how might we transmute it together? He asks her, what aspect of your shadow beckons for devotion? And she asks in return, which fear in your heart deserves the same compassion you offered me? Each question becomes a beacon, guiding them through the labyrinth of psyche toward newly discovered chambers of empathy. In unearthing these buried facets, they shed armor and unveil the raw, pulsing core of their humanity. And yet, even as communion deepens, she remains sovereign, an independent axis around which her own world rotates. He comes to understand that honoring her power means resisting the lure to possess it. He relinquishes the notion that her sorrow is his to heal. Instead, he embraces the truth that each must bear the responsibility of their own redemption. His devotion crystallizes into a vow to support her inquiry without subsuming his own, to listen without seeking to resolve, to love the rhythms of her becoming without demanding an endpoint. In this unfolding alliance, you perceive the true potency of feminine power. It does not conquer by force, but by catalyzing metamorphosis. Her regret, once a shadowy wound, becomes the crucible in which his obsession is refined into conscious love. He learns the paradox that in surrendering his need to control her narrative, he gains sovereignty over his own. His longing, once a chain that bound him to her pain, becomes a golden thread weaving their destinies together in a tapestry of mutual awakening. As their journey continues, he integrates her lessons into every facet of his being. He greets each morning with a silent pledge to honor both his light and his shadow. He navigates conflicts with colleagues by inviting their own vulnerabilities into the conversation. He engages in creative work that channels the energy of his inner alchemy, poems, paintings, projects that mirror the landscapes they have charted within. His life becomes a living testament to the power of transmuted obsession, an offering to the world of love rooted in self-mastery. And she, in turn, finds in him an echo of her own sovereignty, a companion whose devotion is not possession, but a celebration of freedom. In the interplay of their shadows and lights, they co-author a story that transcends the script of victim and conqueror. They become alchemists of the soul, turning regret into gold, forging bonds that honor the sanctity of choice. He carries their shared rituals into the world like talismans of transformation. Each act a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of unexamined impulse. He greets the morning sun with standing stretches, feeling the stretch not just in his muscles, but in the corridors of his consciousness. The echo of her sorrow, once a siren's call that pulled him off course, now harmonizes with the cadence of his own awakening. When he sits to meditate, he invokes both his light and his shadow, naming each with tenderness, fear, shame, strength, compassion, and watching them settle into a peaceful counsel. In professional circles, his presence begins to ripple outward. Colleagues who once knew him as driven but distant now seek his perspective on conflict resolution and emotional intelligence. He shares the Stoic principle that obstacles are invitations to virtue, illustrating it with the story of the woman whose regret became the spark that ignited his own inner alchemy. His words land not as sermons but as mirrors, reflecting others' unspoken longings for purpose and authenticity. In their responses, he sees the same hunger that first drove him toward her confession, a hunger for initiation into the vast realms of self-awareness. Yet he tempers his enthusiasm with humility. He remembers how easily obsession can masquerade as devotion, how quickly the ego can twist noble intentions into new forms of compulsion. When invited to lead a workshop, he structures it around embodied practices. Guided shadow journaling at dusk, silent partner dialogues beneath a canopy of trees, the burning of letters of regret in a circle of flickering lanterns. He invites participants to lean into their discomfort, to honor the gift of their own introspection, rather than rush toward remedy. In the hush that follows each exercise, he senses the stirring of fresh resolve, a promise to become both seeker and keeper of one's own story. In his personal life, tentative romances arise, women who carry echoes of her mystery without the painful gravity of regret. He navigates these connections with the same disciplined awareness that he learned through her initiation. When a new interest shares her own shadow tale, a mistake of youth, a wound that still throbs, he listens without urgency. He responds with questions that honor autonomy. What is this story inviting you to discover about yourself? He monitors the pull of his own old patterns, checking in with himself before reaching out. In this way, he co-creates a dynamic steeped in mutual curiosity rather than reactive need. You too may recognize the signposts of this journey, the shift from frantic pursuit to deliberate presence, the move from hunger to hospitality, the transformation of obsession into collaboration. When you witness someone's regret, consider it an offering, a secret map to their depths. Will you clutch the map tightly, seeking to control its revelations, or will you unfold it gently, tracing its contours alongside them? In that choice lies the alchemy of authentic connection. Meanwhile, she continues her solitary rites, tending her own interior flame. She writes new letters, this time to the parts of herself she celebrates rather than condemns. Her courage, her curiosity, her capacity to love fiercely and freely. In each line, she witnesses her own rebirth, a phoenix arising from the ashes of past selves. He learns of these letters through the flicker of her stories, the way her laughter carries a note of triumph, the way her letters find their way to his desk in anonymous envelopes, each poem a coded message of growth. Their paths cross again one autumn evening in a grove dusted with falling leaves. He carries a collection of his journaled insights, sonnets written in the voice of his shadow, prayers composed for his emerging light. She carries her own anthology of self-celebrations. They sit opposite each other on a fallen log, the world hushed around them. Without ceremony, they exchange their writings, reading aloud the stories of their transformations. Neither seeks applause, both bask in the illumination of mutual witness. In that sacred exchange, obsession seeds to communion. As they rise, the grove seems to pulse with approval. He feels her hand brush his, not a grasp, but a gesture of shared gravity. They walk side by side through the carpet of amber leaves, the crunch beneath their feet echoing the rhythm of their hearts, steady, grounded, alive. In her presence, he notices the merger of two sovereign beings choosing to journey together, not out of compulsion, but from an overflow of selfhood that has room for another's mysteries. In the days that follow, he integrates this final ceremony into his daily life. He begins each meeting by silently acknowledging the unseen dimensions in himself and others. He closes each day by burning a fragment of his journal in miniature, letting the smoke carry away the residue of old fears. His obsession, once a wildfire that threatened to consume him, has become a lantern lighting the path ahead. He walks with clear eyes, open hands, and an open heart. And though their bond remains fluid, sometimes converging, sometimes diverging, neither fears disappearance. For they have learned that true connection thrives not on constant proximity, but on the trust that each will honor their own inner pilgrimage. When distance calls them apart, they meet again at the wellspring of their shared truths, refreshed by solitude and reunion alike. The map of his soul, once sketched by her regret, now bears the intricate patterns of his own devotion, to self, to shadow, to the mystery that dances between two awakened beings. In this delicate balance, he discovers the deepest resonance of attraction, not the clamoring call of addiction, but the steady hum of aligned sovereignty. In the quiet that follows their shared ceremony, life unfolds like a tapestry unspooling its final, or most luminous thread. He awakens to mornings unmarred by compulsion. No more racing pulse at the hint of her return, no more frantic scrolling through messages hoping for her half-sent confession. Instead, he greets the dawn with the calm certainty of one who has learned that presence in his own skin is the most potent form of devotion. The echoes of her regret, once an addictive drumbeat in his veins, have softened into a gentle reminder that every wound, when held with compassion, blossoms into a portal of freedom. She, too, moves through the world with an unburdened grace. Her steps, once weighted by the gravity of what might have been, now carry her forward with the lightness of a soul unshackled. In her gaze resides a quiet triumph, the knowledge that her past does not define her but refines her, carving her spirit into a vessel of radiant sovereignty. He sees her at a cafe window, writing anew in her journal, pen gliding over pages in a dance of creative rebirth. She pauses, inhales, then releases a breath that seems to lift unseen chains from both their hearts. Their conversations have become offerings of abundance rather than negotiations of need. She speaks of sunrise prayers and the comfort of moonlit baths. He responds with reflections on dreams decoded and fears befriended. Neither seeks to fill the void in the other. Instead, each stands full, sharing from a wellspring of self-knowledge. In these exchanges, you witness attraction distilled to its purest form, two sovereign beings choosing to intersect without losing the majesty of their individual selves. In moments apart, he finds solace in solitude. He revisits the oak grove, lays down offerings of gratitude, and feels the earth's steady pulse beneath his palms. He no longer arrives with a heart pounding with desperation, but with one that beats in gentle harmony with the natural rhythms around him. He photographs fallen leaves streaked with morning frost, not to send her proof of existence, but to remind himself of beauty found in transient moments. He carries this practice of mindful witnessing into every corner of his life, at work, in friendships, even in the mirror where he once saw only imperfections. And she, when she stands before the mirror, recites her own liturgy of loving kindness. Her reflection greets her with eyes unclouded by regret, pupils two dark wells of self-acceptance. She traces the lines of her face with her fingertips, honoring each mark as a badge of her journey, the smile line earned through tears, the crease of contemplation forged in silent nights. In her transformation, he sees the living embodiment of feminine power, a force that heals by honoring its own wounds rather than denying them. Together, they navigate a world that demands stories of conquest and victory. They remain impervious to the clamor of validation, for they have learned that the only worth seeking is the one discovered in stillness. In crowded rooms, they stand slightly apart yet deeply aligned, their mutual respect a beacon that invites others to reconsider the nature of connection. Those who witness them in passing feel a stirring curiosity, an urge to learn how to love without clinging, how to be chosen rather than chased. In her final confession, delivered not in words, but in the serene curve of her smile, she offers him the gift of complete acceptance. He meets that smile without trembling, knowing that his worth is not measured by her glance, but by the integrity he carries within. And as they part ways, beneath the rim of dusk, no shadow of longing remains, only the warm glow of two flames that have found their way to brilliance through the darkness. In this culmination, you understand the alchemy that has transpired, regret transformed into reverence, obsession refined into devotion, emptiness filled by the sovereignty of self. The dance of their souls has brought them not to a fortress to be stormed, but to an altar of choice where each stands fully embodied, free from the gravity of unexamined desire. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.